Thanks to everybody for joining this afternoon. You're probably getting all the messages now saying this meeting's being recorded. But again, if you just push the button and stay in with us, we'd appreciate it. Again, this is like we were talking earlier, this is the first time we've done one in a year, because this time last year we got the avian influenza outbreak going on and we got pulled into that. So we've kind of been away from our small flock outreach, but we're really excited to get back to it now. So as part of it, we've been going through series. So this series, this time we're going to kind of look at animal health and how to handle, mortalities and things like that on the farm. So to start off with today, we're going to start off with what we call, oh gosh, I can't even read my own writing, Chicken 911. So this is basic things that you want to do if you run into problems on your farm, just some basic things that we've seen as we've gone around through life and dealt with chickens. Both Megan and I I don't have chickens now. But I've been around chickens, small flock poultry for 50 years. So I've had a few things happen, and these are some of the things that we'll talk about, some of the things that you can do to help your birds get through some of the times that are difficult. So with that, let's start off with, again, we got to throw our disclaimer out there. This is what happens when you work with lawyers. But again, this advice does not represent medical or veterinarian advice or legal advice or any other kind. This is just personal experiences we've had on the farm. Always seek competent veterinarian advice when possible. And use of a website, product, or brand does not mean we're endorsing it. It just happens to be something that we're using at that time that works and fits the need that we're using it for. So again, with that out of the way, finding a veterinarian. That's one of the things we encourage everybody to do, is have a really good relationship with a veterinarian. And that can be more difficult than it sounds. There aren't a lot of veterinarians that know chickens, let's be honest. There's a lot out there that are very good veterinarians. A lot of them are small animal veterinarians, but they don't really have a practice that understands what's going on with poultry. And so you need to look and you need to get a relationship with them so that you're not only, that this veterinarian, it's not just a last minute thing. I'm going to go there when I have a problem. Now, a lot of the states also have diagnostic laboratories that can help you when you have problems. If you set up an appointment, you can call them and take in birds that have passed away or sick birds. They will tell you how they want them presented and how to bring them in. But remember this is a necropsy they're going to perform on them. And a necropsy is kind of like an autopsy. We call it in humans, but in animals, it's always a necropsy. What happens then is they're going to actually euthanize the bird and then go through the bird to find out what's going on. So this is not something that you want to take Fluffy to. I mean, if it's your pet, this is not the place for it to go, because it's a one-way trip. Birds go in and they don't come back. In Maryland, and I know they do in Delaware as well, they offer residents a discounted rate to take their birds in and have them diagnosed. Currently in Maryland, I looked this up yesterday, it's $12 for a resident. I think it was like $72 for a non-resident. But if it's a respiratory type illness where we're worried about AI, because there's a lot of surveillance going on for avian influenza right now, you can actually take them in and they'll usually do a respiratory profile for free. So again, we encourage everybody that if you have a sick bird or something that's showing respiratory design or respiratory distress, please contact your local state. All the states have hotlines for this. We want to make sure that we try and get this disease rounded up as quick as possible. I was just going through some of the headlines. There's some more of it in southern Pennsylvania. They're having some issues in Virginia. So it's not gone away. AI is still a problem, so we need to be very aware of it and do what we can to prevent it from causing problems on our farms. So the other thing we always talk about is, we're going to have birds. And part of owning animals means you're going to have to deal with death. And sometimes there's no way to treat a bird. And so one of the things we want to encourage people to do is, if you do have to euthanize a bird, it must be done in a humane manner. We want them to be done quickly, efficiently. We don't want to cause pain and suffering. That's the last thing we want to do from a welfare point of view or from a personal point of view. We don't ever like inflicting harm on animals. The most common method used on farms is cervical dislocation. I'll show you some pictures of that in just a second. By the way, they're stage pictures. No animals were harmed in the taking of those pictures. Other methods are rapid decapitation or displacement of oxygen with nitrogen or carbon dioxide. But of course, that's a very difficult thing to do on a small farm. Rapid decapitation is exactly what it sounds like. You can use an axe if you do things right and rapidly cut the head off really quickly is one way. I know it sounds bad, but it is one of the easiest and quickest and humanest ways. So when you do cervical dislocation, what you want to do is grasp the bird by its legs, and you put your hand around the head with right at the base of the head is where you want to grab it. And then what you do is you'll pull down and snap your wrist at the same time, and you'll be able to dislocate that neck really quickly, that cervical, junction. And by doing so, you're able to kill the bird quickly and efficiently. Again, this is just some pictures we staged so we could have some pictures. It shows you how to hold, grab, and then pull. Practice if you have a rubber chicken or something you want to practice. But again, this is something that is, when you do it, you want to do it right. You want to do it quickly because, again, we don't want to cause any pain and suffering in birds. There are some things we can't fix. For example, if we look at some of these pictures here, there's really nothing we can really do for a chicken. This beak here, I mean, this bird is a quarter of the size of everybody else. You can see the beak is cross-beaked. It's at a 90-degree angle. It stayed alive, so I guess you could keep it alive. But again, what kind of a life will it have? The chick with 4 legs. Again, my daughters, usually this is an indication that something else is wrong inside. As you can see, 2 of the legs are facing one way and 2 the opposite way. So again, this is a situation where the bird is going to have some other internal problems as well. And in fact, if you look at that navel, you can see it's already swollen. It's probably got some tonsillitis already going on in there too, an infection. And then the third one there with the chick that didn't absorb the yolk, the infection there is just going to be tremendous, and trying to keep that bird alive would be very, very difficult. So at times like that, some of the best things we can do would be to euthanize that bird and to put it out of its pain and suffering, because there's not much we can do in these type of situations. So the other thing we always want to tell everybody to know is know what healthy looks like. Here's a couple pictures of some healthy birds. They look good. Things look well. Their eyes are bright and shiny. Their legs are bright colored. Their feathers or plumage looks good. Of course, you can't see on the silky because, well, you can't see their eyes. But again, you can see those birds look really healthy, as opposed to when you see disease, what are you going to see? These are signs of disease. You can see the birds don't look good. The feathers aren't rough. The feathers aren't smooth. They're not not smooth. They're not well maintained. You can see on the bird on the right, when you look at the comb, you can see it's pale. It's pale around the eyes. The eyes are not bright. You can see the eyes are kind of squinty. So again, these are all signs. The chick on the left, you can see it's got the football-shaped eyes. And again, it's just not feeling well. So again, when we look for things, we want to make sure that we know what healthy looks like, so we know what non-healthy looks like. Signs that your chicken's not well. Well, of course, we look at all the muscle weakness, tremors, lameness, swelling around the eyes and the neck, the comb and wattle. Those are going to turn blue. And anytime we see that, we know that there's some problem with the respiratory disease, respiratory issues going on. They're not able to get that oxygen into the body. So we want to be very careful when we have those things. And again, if we have some sudden death and an unusual number of birds dying quickly in a flock, we want to make sure that we get that reported to the local state authorities, especially at this time as we're continuing to fight that avian influenza throughout the country, really throughout the world. It's been a really bad time the last few years for poultry. Another important thing to do is to look at your poop. Well, not your poop, your chicken's poop. Normal poop is going to have a lot of, it's going to look good. It's going to be firm. It's going to have that white cap on it. You might see a little bit of color. You can actually, if they go out on grass the first time, it may be kind of green. But again, these are all normal looking poops here on the left versus on the right. You can see there's something wrong. I mean, there's blood in one of them. There's all runny. Again, when you start seeing things like that, that's when you know you're going to have some problems, and you need to be looking for other issues in your flock. So again, we're going to talk about poop. Next week, we're going to actually have a whole talk on poop. It's called Poopology, and it'll go over a lot of the different things. So again, join with us next week for a great talk on Poopology. So again, first aid kit. Everybody should have a first aid kit around their farm. You're going to want to have several things in this kit. You're going to have disposable gloves. I mean, with the COVID going around, I think everybody's got some gloves now. Disinfectant spray for wound cleaning, topical antibiotics, vitamins, electrolytes, mineral oil, again, tweezers, scissors, nail clippers, super glue, talk about that. There's some important places we can use super glue. Breeding saddles. This is something if you keep males and you're using your hens and the males are out there that you'll want to have on hand. Again, some sterile saline solution and some hydrogen peroxide to help clean things up. So again, always have a first aid kit, no matter what kind of animals you have. The more animals you have, the bigger this first aid kit gets, and some of the larger some of the things become if you have larger animals. But again, always have a first aid kit on hand. You can actually use the ones out of your own first aid kit if you don't have one set aside just for your birds. So we're going to start off with some of the first things you're going to see. So if you're hatching eggs at home, you're going to probably end up with some chicks that look like this. They're going to have shells stuck to their heads. Or other parts of their body. So there's some things we can do on that are quite easy to fix this really quickly. And that is, you can take some warm water and just take a little warm water and dab it around where that shell is. And in doing so, you're then able to, oh wow, that's picture went to the back instead of the front. You can see underneath there, it's supposed to be on top. Then you can take a pair of tweezers and peel that off. If it's still stuck, you can actually trim a little bit of the feathering away so that, you can get those shells off. And again, once it's done, you're going to want to dab dry that little guy. So here we have him. He got all that stuff stuck to him. It didn't look too good there for a while. Wasn't sure what was going to happen, if he was going to make it. But here he is a week later. It's about 2 weeks later, actually. So you can see quick recovery, birds looking good. It's a simple way we can do it. But again, it's something that doesn't take a little time. It does take a little time. You want to just try and clean them up. And if you don't take it off, it's going to be stuck on there. The other birds are going to peck at it, and it can lead to some problems with the bird being pecked on. Another common thing we see at hatch is going to be Spraddle Legged. As you can see, this chicken here, its legs are spread out. It can't really stand up. So here, Megan did this one. She actually used some pipe cleaner, some craft pipe cleaner, and put around the legs to hold them together. And then the bird's able to stand up. It's able to walk a little bit to get to food and water. And then after a few days, after that bird has got those muscles that pull back in, and that you can pull that off. And that bird, if I remember right, Megan, isn't that one still running around on your flock?
Yeah. It made it.
It
made it. I did leave the pipe cleaner on there a little bit too long, and there was some dents in there. So they grow fast. So you want to check them frequently
right,
while they have these on.
Yeah, you may need to make them looser before you take it off. So it's a good point. So again, simple things like that, you can save a chick that otherwise, it's not going to make it if we don't do some intervention there. Another very common thing we see with little birds is we see with pasty butt, sticky butts, whatever you want to call it. This is where the vent gets plugged with feces, and the chickens, what happens is it plugs over. Oh, look at this picture. You can see this bird doesn't feel good just by the shape of it. It's sitting down, its head's down low, its wings are down compared to everybody else. You can see it doesn't feel well. And that's because that butt is plugged and it can't pass the feces. And in doing so, it plugs up the whole internal side. And if if anybody's ever been constipated, you know how that can be. So again, what we want to do is we want to remove this feces, but if we just yank it off, we're going to yank some skin, we're going to yank some feathers and everything else. The best thing you can do is moisten it up again. Again, get some warm water and carefully moisten the area. You may end up with a little down, but you want to take as little as possible because you don't want to get a big red sore there, because in doing so, other chicks will then be prompted to peck. So again, we want to remove it carefully. And once that's done, chicks will actually recover quite quickly. They're very, very fast at recovering from this. But there's several things that can cause it. So if you see it, think about why this happened. One of the most common things, if you see a whole bunch of your birds that have it, is probably they got cold. We see it quite often when birds get chilled, then you get a lot of pasty butt. But the funny thing is, they get too hot, you can get pasty butt as well. So again, it's one side or the other. So we want to keep those chickens just as comfortable as we can, keep them in the proper comfort zone. We also want to make sure that they have a good quality feed, a feed that's proper for them. For example, in some parts of the world where they use a lot of rye or they use a lot of wheat, you're going to see a lot more issues with pastiness because it changes the viscosity as it goes through the bird, and it can cause some looseness and it's sticking to the feathers as it passes out. Abrasions, minor wounds. If it is a major wound, a very deep one, it's going to need stitches or something like that, you're going to definitely want to talk to a veterinarian. However, for minor things, you're definitely going to want to clean up that area as best you can and then apply an antibiotic. You're going to want to isolate that bird from the other birds because otherwise they're going to peck at it and they're going to try and well, basically they'll end up consuming the bird. It causes cannibalism. So we want to get them away as quickly as possible. You're going to want to treat it for shock. You're going to want to, for example, you're going to want to keep it in an area that's comfortable. It's not bright. It's not, it's just a comfortable area for the bird. Provide it with fresh food and water. But you also want to make sure that it can see other birds. Remember, these chickens are very flock oriented. They're not an individual. So when we isolate them alone, it can cause a lot of stress. So we want to isolate them from the other birds. We want to put them near the other birds so they can see the other birds. And so they don't feel like they're alone in the world, causing more stress on them. Another thing we see often is called Bumblefoot. This is an injury to the lower surface of the foot pad, typically caused by a Staphylococcus bacteria. A lot of times it's caused by an injury, and these can come from the perches, or if you have really, some rough splinters can get in there, if you have some really bad flooring or something like that, but perches are a lot. We see it a lot more in wire, where people keep birds on wire than we do anywhere else. So again, keeping birds off of wire is a very good way to do it. And again, you'll be able to see it because, as you can tell from the picture, there's going to be a swelling, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be pus-filled. If you pick it up, it'll feel hot as well. So prevention, again, make sure that your perches are very good, smooth, that don't have splinters coming out of them. Make sure your bedding's clean. Make sure it's deep. Sometimes, you want it to be soft, so it's cushiony, so when they jump off the perch that they don't cause an injury when they do that. Again, it says here to keep perches less than 18 from the floor to prevent damage. That's true for some breeds. Some of your lighter breeds, and especially your bantams, it can be much higher without a problem as they tend to fly a little bit better. And again, look around. What are some sharp objects? What's out there that can cause injury to your birds? We want to remove them from the environment so that the birds are not having any problem from that. To treat it, you want to soak it in warm water with Epsom salts. You want to clean the infected area as best you can with soap. Then you want to disinfect with alcohol. If the skin's open, you want to drain the abscess. If there's no break in the skin, you might need to make a break with a sterile scalpel or some way to lance it to get that pus out. And then you want to flush it as much as you can and clean it as best you can with hydrogen peroxide. And then you want to keep it away from the other birds. Well, you apply antibiotics, but keep it away from the other birds and keep it wrapped as best you can and clean for as long as you can until it can heal up. I would very much advise you to wear gloves when you do this. Again, you are working with an infectious type bacteria that's infected that bird. We don't want to get you infected as well. So by all means, please take care of yourself and wash up and clean up what you're around yourself when you're done. And that goes for any of the things we're talking about. Wearing some gloves would be a very good advice for all of them. So beak problems. This is something that happens from time to time. For smaller breaks or splits in a beak, this is where super glue can come in and help out really well. You can just put a little super glue on the break and push it back together and hold it there for a couple of minutes till the super glue sets, and often they really take off. They really don't know much is going on. Again, the end of that beak, there is no sensation or anything. It's just a keratinous tissue. So it's kind of like a nail. It's like your fingernails, like a dog. I always would call it to a dog's toenails. You can trim those ends. It's not much of a problem. It's not going to be a problem. But if it gets way down in up close to the face, it can cause long-term issues. But again, the simplest way to the simplest and easiest way to fix a small break or split is just to glue it back together. Again, I showed you a picture of that crossbeak bird earlier. If you have something like that, there's really not a lot you can do with it. At that point, you have to decide what you want to do. You can probably nurture those birds through for a few years, or you may just want to euthanize it, depending on your personal situation. Other problem with beaks is that a lot of times they'll get way too long. They'll start to curve on the end, and it has a hard time to eat. The simplest way to do that is just grab some clippers or, clippers for dog nails and just go out and trim the end. Trim them back up just like you would any other nail. It's not harmful for the bird, but it usually does take a couple people, one person holding them and the other person trimming. Again, we've done it before many times around my house with just simple nail clippers. And that goes for the toenails as well. A lot of times they're going to get really long. and then they can be a problem. So again, and they can also hold on to material and cause balls of manure that get stuck to them. So again, trimming those back occasionally is not, it's not bad. It's not harmful for the bird. But again, these things don't happen as often when birds are allowed to free range, particularly if there's a lot of rocky, rough surfaces. If they're running around on a rough surface, you don't see a lot of this like you do versus if they're in a soft environment. But this time of year, with the avian influenza going around, we are encouraging people to keep their birds confined as much as possible to help prevent the introduction of disease. So again, you might have to watch for this time of year to see if there's any problem with the nails and the beaks. Now, there are a lot of different internal parasites. We're not actually going to go over that today. Again, next week, we're going to have Dr. Dan Batista come in, and he's going to discuss, like I said, poopology, and he has some great information to share about the different types of worms and coccidia that come with birds, and he's going to go over that with you next week. However, we will move to some external parasites. So there are a few. We have scaly leg mites. You'll see this from time to time. The mites get up underneath the scales. They burrow in there. The scales pop out. Stay fast ticks or stick tight. Stay fast fleas or stick tight fleas. I need to change that because half the country says one, half the other. I don't know which is which. But anyway, you'll see them. They're typically around the eyes, but you will find them on the round where there's no hair on the face. You can even see some up on the wattles. What you're seeing here is the females, and they just stick tight there and they just drop eggs. So as soon as you see this, you can pick them off. You can use some different things we'll talk about in a second. Northern fowl mites, as you see the little mites around the vent here, the best place to check for mites on your bird is just pick them up and have them fan their feathers out around their vent or blow on it. You'll be able to look down and see, and you'll see what looks like a lot of dust. Or if it looks black or dirty, you may have a problem with mites. And northern fowl mites, typically they're introduced by wild birds. Starlings and house sparrows are notorious for spreading them. So that's one reason we want to make sure that we keep those birds away. We want to make sure we isolate our birds from those wild birds. For scaly leg mites, you can coat the legs with an oil or petroleum jelly, and you keep that on there for a long time to smother them. Adding some sulfur powder to the oil can really help. Elemental sulfur powder is kind of sharp, abrasive. I would say the same with diatomaceous earth. Adding that to it would probably work as well. Not approved method. I don't say it's not approved, but if your birds are not in production, you're not keeping them. If you have some used motor oil, is one of the most effective things I've ever seen used on them. Used motor oil has microscopic pieces of metal in there. It's going to suffocate them. That metal is going to help rupture their skin and break them up, but it's a very effective way to get rid of them. Dr. Michael Dare he was a specialist out of Connecticut, and he recommended dipping the legs in gasoline for 45 seconds, then letting them air dry and applying A&D ointment. On the second day, you just apply the AD and ointment and then go on to a second gasoline dip on the third day, and then keep applying the A&D until the scales appear normal. I've never tried this, but I would say don't smoke and do it at the same time. That's for sure. But again, that seems to be something that would probably be effective, as those are going to penetrate down in. But again, effective, simple way to do it if you want to stay natural is any kind of a natural oil over the top. And again, if you have access to sulfur powder, it works really well in conjunction with them. There are some other products that you can use as well. Insecticides can be used, Sevin, Prometheans, Primerathons, but no, it's, you look around, there's just a lot of different things you can use. However, if you do choose to use any of these products, make sure you follow all labels. If there's any kind of a withdrawal time before you can use the meat or eggs, make sure you follow that. And again, it's just going to depend on which product you use. I'm personally a fan of trying the natural remedies before the pesticides, but again, sometimes you need to use pesticides. Diatomaceous earth, and this works for the mites as well, all the external mites. If you put the diatomaceous earth or some elemental sulfur powder where your birds dust bathe regularly, they're going to get those all over them. You can actually do it with insecticides as well, like your Sevin dust, and they'll actually spread it on themselves and get it to where it needs to be to help control those birds or those mites. I will say my personal experience with diatomaceous earth is it helps prevent, but I haven't seen it work effectively at treating. That's my own personal experience. However, I've actually used all of these different ways to actually take care of mites at one point or another. But again, this is an easy way to do it. You use their own dust bathing material or dust bathing behavior in order to get them to spread that on themselves. And you can leave the diatomaceous earth and elemental sulfur powder in place all year, and they'll just keep putting on them. It's not harmful to the birds. It's a natural product that's naturally there in the environment. So again, these are some simple things we can do to try and contain them. Crop problems. There seems to be a lot. As we all know, the crop is located, it's the first part of their digestive system. It goes down the throat into the crop. You can see in the picture here, it's right here. From there it goes to proventriculus. It's kind of a storage pouch. It expands and contracts as it holds food for the bird. But again, we are seeing some more issues with crop issues as we go along. Let's see. Wait, there was a question I need to probably address. A&D ointment. It's another just a product like Vaseline. So you can just use Vaseline. AD is just another one. How long do you put it on? I'd keep it on there until the bird starts to look a little more normal. At that point, you can probably stop using it. And you can also, that would be the best way to do it. Just keep it on there until the scales start to look a little more normal. Megan, you weren't telling me there was questions on that. All right, so what does a crop feel like? Well, if you look at it, a normal crop is empty and hard to find when a bird wakes up. So the best time of day to check for crop problems is when the bird wakes up. Grab them off when I'm going to look for some problems there, I'm going to go in and grab them off the roost. I'm going to go in before the lights come on and start looking at them at that point. You can feel, later in the day, it can feel large, but the contact moves around really easily. You can feel it with your fingers. You can feel the different grains of corn or whatever they're eating. It's another way to do it. But again, if you grab them first thing in the morning, it should be empty. If it's not, you have something going on there. So again, like I said, if it has a lot of contact when the bird wakes up, that's bad. That means the bird's not getting it through the body. It's going to feel hard. It almost feels like a golf ball. When you reach in there and grab it, it's going to feel like a golf ball. Another sign that something's wrong is it's going to smell. When you have some issues going on with some of the fungus and all that, you're going to smell a lot of the bad smell coming out of the birds. Another thing is it's going to feel hot. If it's not normal, it's going to feel hot. Like all of us, when things go wrong, we start to feel heat. It's one of our body's reactions. Another time it can be really large and squishy and sloshy. That's also another bad sign that maybe it's stretched and hasn't recovered as well as it should. So when we talk about this, one of the first things everybody talks about is an impacted crop. As you can see, it's kind of hard to tell from pictures, but if you look, you can see the crop is really extended on this little bird here versus this is the other one picked up at the same time. If you look down and a little closer, you can actually see the crop is really popped out there. So an impacted crop is when the crop gets impacted with materials such as feed, often caused by eating large amounts of grass. Again, you'll see some of this sometimes when you first turn birds out in the spring and they start eating a lot of grass. And again, that's why personally when I let them out in the spring, I let them out only for a short time and then slowly increase the time. String or other undigestible materials can also be a problem when they get caught in there. Most easily seen in the early mornings when the birds wake up, as I mentioned earlier, because the crop will still have full. It'll still be all there. Now, if you can palpate the crop, it's going to feel like a golf ball, as I said. But what you can do on this, in mild cases, they can be treated by massaging it gently, rubbing it, kind of like kneading it like a dough, try to help it break up and move it along so it can get down into the proventriculus and move on through the digestive tract. Sometimes this action alone can cure a problem if it's caught early and the content is digestible. So in other words, if it's string or something like that, it's probably not going to help. But if it's just packed it with feed, it can actually, slowly massaging it, getting them to drink can actually help them get along quite well. You'll probably have to do it a couple times during the day until the crop gets full, empty. What I suggest is isolating them alone. Well, not alone, but isolating them from feed is what I want to say. Again, let them have visuals of other birds. But
having lots of water. You want to make sure you get a lot of water in them to help try and break that down. In severe cases on a valuable bird, you're probably going to need to see a veterinarian to have it surgically removed, especially if it's material that's not digestible, because there's really no way to get it back out without a surgery. Along with impacted crop, you're going to see something called pendulous crop. As you see here in the picture, you can see how that crop is hanging way down. You start seeing this is a problem because the feed will actually get down in there and then it can't empty out properly. So you've always got this stuff rolling around in there, and this can lead to other problems like sour crop. Again, there are no treatments for this. Basically what's happened is the crop has been distended, it's been damaged, the ligaments have been damaged. There's nothing you can do. However, there are people that will actually, this is called a crop bra, and it can be helpful to help hold that crop up and hold it up tight so that it'll empty out and the material can keep going down. Again, this is going to be a lifetime of wearing that bird, because anytime you take it off, it's still going to fall right back down the way it was as pendulous and start being a problem. As always, if you have birds that are exhibiting this problem, do not use them as breeders. We don't want to keep this, there is a genetic component to this, or there can be, so we definitely don't want to pass it on to future generations. Some of the causes of this are if you keep your birds, don't have feed for a long time, and they get a lot of feed and then run out of feed, binge eating going on and off. It can also be done by, I've seen it where people were feeding sand because they felt the birds needed some grit, so they were feeding them sand. Well, that sand couldn't pass through. It had a lot of weight, and it slowly distended the crops down to where we had a whole flock full of it. So again, make sure you're feeding your birds a proper, good, nutritious diet. Now, I mentioned you can also get sour crop, which is a yeast infection of the crop, and this is often a result of an impacted or pendulous crop. Usually these things all go together. What you need to do first is empty the crop and then treat it for the fungal infection. Epsom salts, 1 teaspoon in a cup of water to flush out the bird, and then you can use some copper sulfate, a tiny amount, 1/2 teaspoon per gallon of drinking water to try and actually treat it. So those are some things you can do. There are, I don't know of anything on the market really that's marketed for treating these. Again, you can use vinegar water as well. Anything you can do to help break up or to combat that fungal infection is what you're going to want to do. So one of the things you have to do is try and get a crop empty. One of the ways of doing that is getting your chicken to regurgitate. And you have to be careful when you do this because you don't want to aspirate your bird. But what you want to do is you want to give them a lot of water. Then you're going to massage that crop, get everything loose as you can. Then you put your finger between the beak when it's open. And again, I would suggest using gloves. In this picture here, they're not. I would definitely suggest, but they weren't actually trying to get it to regurgitate. It was just for demonstration purposes. Then you put your finger between the beak to keep it open. Then you tip the head down. And once it starts, if you start to get fluid and things coming out, you're going to want to count to 3, then put the bird right back up so it can breathe and prevent aspiration. And you may have to do it 3 times in order to get everything out. But again, it's something you can do to help get something like if the bird eats something it shouldn't, or if you need to empty a crop out, it's a way to do it. But again, be very careful that you don't cause your bird to aspirate, and that could end up killing your bird as well or causing other issues. Another thing we often see is a prolapsed oviduct. It's sometimes referred to as a blowout or cloacal prolapse or a peck out. There's a lot of different things. This is when a hen, so you got to look at the anatomy of the hen to understand this one. When an egg is laid, the lower end of the oviduct actually goes out forward through the cloaca as the egg is laid. So actually part of the oviduct is actually exiting the bird as the egg comes out, and then it's retracted back in. If it doesn't retract back in, then it can cause some issues. And the other birds can see it. They can start pecking at it, which can cause injury. Sometimes when an egg is really large, it causes problems. Honestly, the thing that we're causing the most problems we've seen in most of the hens, in my experience, has always been obesity. So if you have hens that are obese, and they tend to see more prolapsed oviducts than anything else, and I can say that about other species as well, actually. But again, If you have a bird that does prolapse, I would definitely, if it's a one-off, I don't know, but I would definitely not use them as a breeder because we don't want any kind of a genetic trait showing up in our birds. Prolapses do usually reoccur. So again, as I just said, we don't want to use them as a breeder. If a hen is your favorite pet and the prolapse is not severe, there are some things you can do. Separate it from the rest of the flock, clean it gently, and push it back in. If the tissue is injured, you're definitely going to want to clean it and then apply an antibiotic. And then you're going to want to keep an eye on that bird to see if it happens again. If it does, you may have a situation where that's going to continue to happen throughout the life of the bird. There could be some kind of a physical injury that's causing it to happen internally. But again, keep an eye on those birds. Look at the cause. Is the bird too fat? Is there too much light in nests, which is often a problem? Do you have enough nests? Your nests need to be enough that the birds aren't crowding them. They need to be in an area which is dim. Don't put your don't put your nests in bright areas. They like the dim. They like the shady. So again, put your nest back there. That also hides that. So when that vent comes out or that oviduct pops out and it pops back in, it's dim. The other birds don't see it. They're less likely to peck at it and less likely to cause a problem for you. Sometimes, however, prolapses can develop and chicks can be pecked at or hens. And as you can see in this case, we actually have intestines hanging out. At this point, there's nothing you can really do. Even if you were able to get them back in, you're going to be fighting septicemia for the life of that bird. At this point, probably the most humane thing to do would be to euthanize this bird. Again, causes, like I said, obesity is the number one thing I've seen. Laying large eggs, laying eggs when a chicken's too young. But again, if you can keep your birds in good shape and keep your nests in a dim area where other birds don't see and can't lay, or there are individuals in the nest and the other birds aren't there and it's dim, usually you can prevent this from happening. Egg bound. This is the new trend according to social media that everybody's reporting. This is when an egg gets stuck in the oviduct of a hen as it's being laid. And this is a very rare event. I just had someone call me the other day about this. The first thing to do before all the other, what you're going to read, is actually pick your bird up and palpate it. Feel the abdomen, feel down between the bones. Is there actually an egg there? And that's one of the most important things you can do before you start jumping to conclusions. Excuse me. Again, it's often associated with hens that are overweight. So keeping your birds in the proper weight is going to help you prevent a lot of this disease. But again, a lot of times if this does happen, birds will appear weak. They'll lose interest in food and water. They may show lameness in one or two legs. Some people say that they actually walk like a penguin. Their stance is different. But again, look around the vent, the cloaca, feel. You should be able to, if there's an egg stuck there, you should be able to feel it. And be careful as you do that, because if you break the egg, that can actually lead to an internal infection and thus causing death. So again, you've got to be very careful with it. But at the same time, you feel for the egg, because I've run into several cases lately where that was not the issue, but that's what they were diagnosing. So again, make sure you diagnose properly. So to assist the hen to pass the egg, you can apply some lubricant around the cloaca. A lot of people suggest giving them a warm bath. Tends to relax the muscles, allow the egg to pass. A lot of other people say put them alone in an isolated dark area helps. This is not something I've really had a lot of problems with. I personally, I think the reason people always say it was egg bound is because they find a chicken that's dead and there's an egg in the oviduct. Well, that doesn't mean that's what killed it. But again, if they're laying eggs, it could have been a lot of different things. So again, make sure you do it right. If the egg still won't pass, then you may need the help of a veterinarian. Again, you need to determine at that point what's in the best interest of the hen in order to move forward. Heat stroke is another thing that we often see. I say that as today's in the 30s with the wind blowing and it's cold. But in the summertime, heat stroke can be a problem. This is going to be a bigger problem for meat birds and layers because they have a lot more muscle mass that they have to try and cool down than the hens do. The laying hens actually have a lot smaller bodies or less muscle on them that they have to try and cool. It can be caused by high temperatures. Associated with high humidity is what really kills birds. High temperatures, birds have shade, they have water, they're probably going to be okay, but you start getting high temperature, the humidity, and then we start to have a lot of problems. You'll notice that birds are starting to overheat. They're going to start to pant. When a bird starts to pant, that means it's using energy in order to get rid of that excess heat. But at the same time, panting causes a generation of heat. So you have to watch. Panting too hard can actually lead to a spiral, death spiral, because it's just going to cause the heat to continue to climb inside the bird. So usually what we want to do is if it is hot, we always want to make sure that our birds have shade. I always tell everybody, put your chicken shack, house, whatever you build, have it in an area that's shaded during the summer, particularly in the afternoon if possible, or at least part of the day, allow, to keep that heat from building up. Make sure they have somewhere that they can go to get shade, and also make sure they have plenty of water. If you still have a problem, or if you have big birds and meat type birds, putting a fan on them, just blowing air across them. It makes us feel better. It also works for your chickens as well. You can actually sprinkle water on your birds if it's really hot and you're really concerned, and then blow a fan on them. That will work too. Change water often, make sure it's cool, that it's fresh, that it's something they really want to drink. And don't place your water in direct sunlight. Place it in direct sunlight can lead the water to be hot. We all know how much we don't want to drink hot water. Neither do our birds. It's kind of interesting. They like cooler water. Heat stroke. If a bird is suffering from heat stroke, try to cool them down, move them to a cool place, use a fan to move air on them. Frozen water bottles tend to be one of the better things you can use on these things. Putting a frozen water bottle next to them, let them snuggle up with that. Try to pull that heat out of them as quickly as possible. As you can see, these birds are starting to show some of the heat signs. You can see the beaks are open. Hard to see. It's kind of dim, but you can see the wings are out. They're in the shade. They're standing in the shade. They're out of the sunshine. And their beaks are open so that they can get more air movement through, because chickens actually use their lungs to cool themselves down. They don't sweat like we do. So like dogs, they use their respiratory system in order to regulate their body temperature. Shock. Those that survive predators. This is something we do see a little bit of. Lately, I've been having, lately everybody's talking about how chickens have quit laying. There's a multitude of reasons for it, but one of the individuals that called me the other day, after we started talking, traced it back, we found out his flock had been had a fox in it a couple days earlier, and his chickens went out of lay, and part of that was the results of the fox getting in there. So again, when a predator strikes, you're going to want to give your birds a little extra love and attention afterwards. You want to provide them with extra, some good food, some calm. Let them get over the stress of that and get back to normal. Cannibalism. Birds will pick at sores or cuts of other birds, and this can become aggressive. This often happens when we introduce new birds. They're trying to shuffle up the pecking order, and I've actually seen it get to the point where they've actually consumed whole individuals. So we want to make sure, and it's not because the birds didn't have feed. It's just they got aggressive and started pecking. You often see it aggressiveness by roosters. Roosters are pretty bad, but if you don't have a rooster in there, the hen can be really bad. For some reason, having roosters with the hens tends to kind of mellow them a little bit, but roosters can be a problem as well. Another form of this is when they eat eggs. So, protect your eggs, use fake eggs, whatever you got to do to protect the eggs as well. But again, one thing you can do to help prevent this is provide areas in your run or in your chicken house where birds can get away. For example, simply putting a board up against a wall so that birds can run behind it to hide from other birds, to get away from them is a great way to do it. Having extra perches, just things like that where birds can get away from each other tends to help with the cannibalism. Another thing you can do is trim the beaks. Again, you can flatten the ends of the beaks so that they're not sharp, and that can help stop them from being able to use cannibalism as that. And again, as we talked about earlier, trimming the nails, but this time we're trimming it because as they jump up and down, particularly on your males when they mate, the females, by having those nails trimmed good, we're going to get less damage to the hens. Less damage to the hens is going to result in less cannibalism. Again, this is what it's going to look like if you have roosters that are mating with your hens. You can see as the roosters mount, they're tearing the backs up. If those nails are sharp, you're actually going to get some scrapes in the skin, which can result in cannibalism. Now, it's easy to find this because you see the back is bare. If you look right at the base of the head, you see a bare patch as well, because the rooster is going to peck and hold on to feathers here as he mounts the hen. So again, this is an easy way to determine. This is a natural behavior. It's just gotten to the point where we need to take a preventive measures to do this. One way you can do that is remove all the males for a while, let the hens recover, reduce the number of males, but even then they may have a favorite hen that they still like to mate. In which case you could do, these are called saddles, breeding saddles. You can find them online or you can make your own. My wife sewed me up a bunch one time. You flip, they got a little elastic, go over the wings, folds them on the back. Now when the rooster mounts, you have a pad there that he's standing on, so it's not going to scratch your hen up. Again, these are simple things that we can do to keep our flocks healthy. Again, I know I went through this pretty fast. There was a lot to cover, and I'm